Hi, good morning, everyone.
Yes, we can hear you just fine, Matthew.
Okay, great. We have about 100 attendees so far for the attendees. So from today, all of you are from the different enterprise, Institute of Higher Learning, as well as from SkillsFuture Singapore and Workforce Singapore colleagues. A very warm welcome to this 20th Jobs and Skills Insight webinar covering the topic Emerging Stronger Through Talent Transformation, Unleashing Potential Through Strategic Workforce Planning and Job Redesign. I am Matthew from the Skills Development Division of SkillsFuture Singapore. Together with me today is Jia Tao, my colleague, and of course, we have from EY, Samir and Callista, who is the presenter for today's topic. And Samir is a partner of EY, and as an advisory leader of EY ASEAN Workforce, he has a wealth of experience in workforce in human resource consulting. His expertise includes organization structuring, manpower planning, job redesign, developing a high performance culture, integration of performance and rewards, talent programs, as well as HR reviews and audit. Callista is Associate Director of Workforce Advisory and People Advisory Services. Together, they will be bringing you the topic for today's webinar. Okay, before we go into the webinar proper, here are some pointers and advice for our webinar attendees so that you can get the most of your roles in the participating of this webinar together. This whole entire webinar segment will take about 45 minutes, and during the webinar, attendees will be muted by default to avoid feedbacks and interference. However, you can post your question anytime using the Q&A option on your screen. If there's any questions that you're interested, you can upvote those questions and we'll do our very best to address them. Any unanswered questions during the session, be assured that we will address them after the session. Callista and Samir will be speaking for 45 minutes to cover presentation. Then after, we will launch into the Q&A session for the remaining duration. The webinar session will be recorded and published in My SkillsFuture portal, SSG, LinkedIn, and YouTube page. Together with the slides will be sent to you by email after the webinar. First of all, we'll take this time to share about SkillsFuture Singapore. So our vision is to cultivate a nation of lifelong learners, a society that values skills masteries, and our mission is to enable every individual to learn for life, pursue skills mastery, as well as develop fulfilling careers for a future-ready Singapore. We as SSG believe that no matter where you are in life, schooling years, early careers, mid-careers, or silver years, you will find a variety of resources to help you attain mastery of skills. And mastery of skills is more than just having the right paper qualification and being good at what you do currently. More importantly, is a mindset of continuous striving towards greater excellence through knowledge, application, and experience. We are dedicated to help you to make informed choices as you build and expand your skill sets for your professional and career development. Through our Jobs and Skills Initiative, we are strive to provide useful insights so that you can attain and create a better future through skills mastery and lifelong learning. So on today's topic on how to emerge talent transformation in the evolving environment, especially Singapore and the rest of the world are braving through and beyond COVID-19. How do you, as Singapore enterprise, carry out workforce transformation, and how can human capital be reimagined and leveraged to deliver strategic objective? So I now hand over to Samir, who will be taking over for the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Jia Tao. Thanks, SSG. And thank you, participants, for joining today's session. My name is Samir, and me, along with Callista, will walk you through today's session. Callista is an associate director at EY, looking after workforce consulting practice, has worked tremendously on the workforce planning and job redesign initiatives. I myself lead the ASEAN Workforce Advisory practice for EY. And hopefully, between the two of us, we'll be able to answer some of your burning questions on workforce planning and job redesign. Let's look at what we have planned for today. Just on the agenda on the next slide, we wanted to cover a bit around the macro overview of how COVID-19 is impacting the world, talk a bit around what this actually means from a talent perspective, and then go into the nuts and bolts around how we can transform talent through SWP, through job redesign, through upskilling, which is what Callista will walk you through. And then share a few case studies to make it real. And lastly, leave you with some resources that can help you get started on your talent transformation journey. But before I kind of begin, let me kind of paint this picture, right? We are today now on the 26th of Jan. We are 25 days into 2021, and we are roughly 15 days away from Chinese New Year. So hopefully it's not too late to wish you a happy new year or too early to wish you Gongzi Fa Chai, right? But more importantly, what we must realize through 2020 is the fact that the world has never changed so fast, yet it will never change so slowly again. What this basically means is that the pace of change is likely going to be accelerated, likely going to be more digital, right? And where this puts pressure around people practices is primarily on the ability to get the workforce to upskill, reskill, and therefore all the work that SSG, WSG, and all the other government agencies have done around the reskilling are all down the real path, all down the right path. Let me start with a view of, if the world is changing, where is this disruption likely coming from, right? And EY released a megatrends report, which just in the early part of this year, in fact, just at the end of 2020 and 2021, and we said some of the primary forces that are changing the world today are around technology, around demographics, around globalization, around environment specifically on the COVID-19 pandemic. But what is actually changing is some of those megatrends. Some of those megatrends include, one, the fact that we are moving now from a data economy to a behavioral economy. And what that actually means is, like data, behavior itself is being quantified, standardized, packaged, and traded. So the key question as an organization is, what's the new governance model? We had a governance model for data. Therefore, what is the new governance model for behavior? Another key megatrend that I wanted to at the outset share with you is around synthetic media. The fact that this is emerging as a new cyber risk for businesses, and there are threats of disinformation, misinformation, and deepfakes. Question to all participants on this call is, what's your new risk management strategy in light of synthetic media? The third very key megatrend is around the future of thinking. And technology has obviously translated our jobs and translated our tasks, but the key question here is, it's also translating our attention spans, which have now become a lot shorter. I'd like to just share one very common question that typically people, when they're recruiting, would ask. 5 years back, let's say in 2015, if you're going through an interview, very likely you would get the question, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? If I asked that question in 2015, all those who gave that answer, they're wrong, because no one could have envisaged where we've currently reached in 2020. The amount of transformation, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So what I'm trying to say here is that with technology, our attention spans are becoming a lot shorter. And therefore, what that is leading to is diminishing trust. Therefore, the question becomes, how do we then engage our workforce? How do we then ensure that they continually get wowed through the employee experience they get in the organization? And the last is the fact of work and life being unbounded. In the past, there was a lot of talk around the future of work. We really think now the future of work has become FOW3, which is basically future of work, future of workforce, future of workplace. Let me kind of unpack that. Future of work basically means how work will change with technology. So what are the new tasks? How will tasks get replaced? What are the new skills you need to imbibe? Which are the skills that build skills? Therefore, how can we then translate jobs to become more productive, right? Fair amount of talk, fair amount of effort gone in that. The second question is around the future of workforce. So what's the role of the workforce now to upskill, reskill? And therefore, the biggest statement I'd like to leave in this conference is, learning is soon going to become the new dollar. That means learning is soon going to become the most important thing in the employee value proposition that organizations can provide their employees. And therefore, a skills-based culture is very critical. So there's future work, there's future workforce. The third critical question is the future of the workplace, which is, we've been through a model where prior to COVID-19, we were purely on a face-to-face working relationship. Now we move to a virtual relationship, and likely as vaccinations start getting rolled out, we move to a more hybridized kind of relationship in many ways. So the key question becomes, what's the future workplace? How is it structured? What's the amount of right space that we need to provide in our workplace, and how do we deal with that workforce? So there's there's the big question of workforce planning. Added to that question is, going forward in 2021, how will we treat that workforce in for those who are vaccinated and not vaccinated? For example, if you are in a frontline role in healthcare and you don't want to take up the vaccination, what's that role in the workplace that you can provide? So there's that big question on the workplace itself that still needs to be answered in 2021. So with that, I'd just like to move through some research on the next slide around how COVID-19 is impacting the world. I think many of us would be aware of what I'm presenting on this slide. Really, phase one, January 2020, it feels more than a year back. It feels many years back when it all started, where WHO was alerted. Then it moved through some level of sectoral disruption. Then it moved through some global crisis. And now we are pretty much in some form of a global recession across the world in many of those markets. On the next slide, IMF came up with predictions sometime back in 2020, where there was negative GDP, and then the growth rates would likely come back in 2021. What we are seeing again from the market here is these projections kind of looking better, because remember, 2020 is the fall and 2021 is likely a K-shaped recovery that we are likely to see through the year. Now, EY on the next slide did some quick modeling and plotting of what this means from GDP in Singapore and its impact, and the impact of the stimulus that we got through our many budgets, fortitude, unity, resilience, so on and so forth. And we're pretty much now just running into the new budget season, and therefore we expect some of those incentives to continue to protect our growth rates and to protect the employment rates in the market as well. So really, we were very fortunate through the various stimuluses like the job support scheme, jobs growth incentives, so on and so forth, that allowed for us to maintain some level of reasonableness when it comes to the impact of COVID-19 to our employment scenario. But what's critical is on the next slide, is the fact that COVID-19 is not necessarily negative for all industries. There are actually some industries that have done well even in COVID-19. An example of that could be consumer tech, could be pharma, where the industry's fundamentals were strong and COVID-19 actually didn't impact it, and they continue to remain strong. Another good example of this could be government itself. I don't think governments have been so busy in the last few years than in this pandemic. So really, there are those industries which are strong and therefore driving high employment. But what's important is on the right side of this slide is when the industry is strong, if you're in consumer tech or pharma, the implications on the workforce is still for you to do a very detailed workforce planning exercise to determine what's the quantity and quality of skills that you have in your organization. And therefore, what are the solutions you can implement, whether it be a buy solution, that means acquire new talent, whether it be a build solution, that is reskill, upskill, provide learning and development for your employees, or it could be a borrow solution, that means outsource or get some specific areas done by third party or consulting firms along with it. So really, the strong sectors, consumer tech and pharma, they have workforce implications primarily around SWP and internalizing well-being practices. Some of the industries are also transforming. So if you were in automotive, or you were in real estate, or you were in FMCG, food or logistics, you would see a large degree of transformation happening in the business model itself, in the way they operate. And therefore, from a workforce standpoint, you'd see agile, digital upskilling, redesign of jobs, and managing this new employee experience or the change experience becoming critical for those organizations. On the lower half of this slide, you'd see organizations or sectors that are being reshaped. For example, oil and gas or physical retail. Physical retail is an easy example where you see a lot more being done through e-commerce, through digital formats. And therefore, again, a strong pressure on the workforce to upskill, strong pressure on agile anticipation and deployment of people on service enhancements. And last but not least, there is those sectors that I think we still have a fair amount of question mark in, both travel and hospitality, because the rebound is not fully visible. I know from a hospitality perspective, all of us have our rediscover vouchers, and hopefully you are using them in good stead. But really, the travel hospitality industries are probably the most shook and the most difficult to predict when that major rebound will happen. And therefore, the issues around workforce is to keep jobs in those industries, being ready for when the economy does rebound in those sectors, as well as maintaining a strong employee well-being strategy. So really what we wanted to state is very often we end up with workforce implications as a whole, but in reality, we need to look at where we are in our organizations, what's our business strategy going forward, whether we are in an industry that is reshaping itself or which has strong fundamentals and is driving that disruption, and that will drive what the workforce implications are going forward. So on the next slide, I won't spend much time on the next slide, but basically, we've talked of mega trends around building resilience. We've seen organizations kind of now pivot away from doing very long-term business planning. So again, in 2019, it would be very common for organizations to do a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year kind of a business plan. But with the whole COVID-19 scenario, we've seen the cycles of those planning becoming a lot shorter. In fact, there are organizations that are doing quarterly, half-yearly, annually, or maybe even up to 3 years kind of business plan. So it's become a lot more tighter in terms of managing the pandemic and managing the business disruptions along with it. The last comment I wanted to make here on this slide is the last bullet point there. We see rise of digital. We see digital and Industry 4.0 and digital transformation becoming more and more critical as we go forward. In fact, the organizations that were already on this journey pre-pandemic actually had a head start for organizations that were beginning their journey during pandemic. So therefore, we see this transformation journey continuously going to be critical. So it begs the question around, so what does this mean for talent or for employees? So on the next slide, EY, on the next slide, please. EY has developed an enterprise resilience framework, which basically speaks of the various 9 pillars an organization needs to have or focus on to drive resilience. And it includes supply chain, insurance, technology, government, public policy. But what's critical, 2 of those 9 pillars are people-led. One is on employee health and well-being. How can you realistically safeguard the health and well-being of your employees? And the second being talent and workforce. So what you do when most of your operations are being dependent on people not being on site. But what's also critical is through this last 1 year, the mindset of the consumer has changed. So on the next slide, please. You would see the consumer behavior has drastically changed. And when we say consumer behavior, it is not only in the way that they would treat their data, their own personal data, but also in the way that they would shop, the way that they would travel, the kind of products that they would buy, the importance to environment, sustainability, the how often they would likely travel in the future, even post-vaccination run out. So what this is driving is some implications for business. So businesses are looking at seizing new growth opportunities. Innovation has become the new buzzword in businesses, and it's nearly become something that you run along with business as usual. Organizations are redefining their purpose. That's the only way to go to be able to keep the workforce engaged, because everybody wants to work for an organization that has a strong purpose and is environmentally sustainable as well. They are reinventing the solutions and they're enabling this full digital enterprise. So really 5 critical things we see from an HR perspective happening. 1, I've spent a bit of time talking about this, which is learning. Learning is soon going to become the new dollar in the employee value proposition. Budgets on learning in organizations are increasing. The second is organizations are spending time conducting workforce planning, redesigning jobs, internalizing well-being practices. And last but not least, they are defining this new reward strategy and defining the new performance mechanism. So they're defining the metrics around what gets measured, because all of us know that what gets measured gets done. So really, the 5 key solution areas from a HR or people perspective are on the right side of this slide. My last slide before I hand over to Callista to walk us through SWP and JR itself is we've seen a number of changes in this period. The first change is around business models. We've seen lesser hierarchical structures and a more flatter organization running in, which is more collaborative, more team-based kind of structure. I think I want to spend a bit of time around agile ways of working, where collaborative working models have been put in place. A great example of this would be just when we hit our circuit breaker period back in April, how we transformed from a physical to a purely virtual setup across most organizations. In reality, if there was no pandemic and you wanted to put a paper around doing that, I would guess it would nearly take you 3 to 5 years to get that paper approved in your organization. This is where we broke down hierarchies, we broke down silos, we created collaborative teams, and organizations moved from a purely physical to a virtual world. We see this continuous shift in consumer behavior to continue, and therefore innovation in organizations and digital transformation in organizations is critical. And last but not least, we see an active role of government through collaborative policy making, better delivery of public services, and use of behavioral science. Because, like I said in the early part of my presentation, that we're moving from a data economy to a behavioral economy. So with that, I'll pass it to Callista, who will walk us through the details on SWP and JR. Over to you, Callista.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Hope you are following the session just as well. So we've got about another 20 minutes or so. So hopefully you could stay with us until we hit the Q&A. So I know most of you from your profile, you are in the HR team, and let's just say that I kind of understand what you're going through. I've been there. Haven't yet done what you went through exactly last year, but I'm sure a lot of you would have done either consciously or unconsciously what I'm about to just share, right? So today definitely looks very different as how it is in 2019 and how you would go about your day-to-day life as well. So there are three key things that I want to share with you, and I'll go in according to the numbers that you see on the screen. One, we do know that there is a need to shift of your workforce, right? And the key question that you probably hear from not just your business partners, but also yourselves is, what exactly do I need to do, right? And how exactly can I do that? So number one, we do know that work has changed. It is also going more and more digital. We hear that all the time. But what does that really mean? And here we are going to give you a bit more of a common term so that we are all on the same page. One, when we say that work is changing and is evolving, we are talking about more, how can we move from manual into more automated? Basically, some of the more key things is, how do we take the robot out of the human, right? So that we can have the human do more value-added task. What does that then really mean, right? Is if I can, automate things for a robot to do, that doesn't mean that my job's going to go away. It just means that I can do more rules-based work, I can take more judgments, I can focus a lot more risk, compliance, and things that, a robot cannot do. Which also then means, if you look up from a triangle perspective, right at the top, and that's something which the human can do and the robot probably cannot really do yet, is how can I do more judgment-based tasks, right? So that's really one. Work is changing. We're moving away from manual to a lot more automated. If you think about more ease of language, is how do I take the robot out of the human? Yeah. Second, we again, if you minus 20 years, we always hear around, yeah, the workforce is changing. It's a lot of Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials. What now, right? So we are moving from a very traditional loyalist, let's work in the same company from the first time I joined all the way to the last time I leave the organization, to the rise of gig economy, for example. Gig economy may or may not be a bad thing. Yeah? If you are, say, in the arts and culture sector, a gig economy is the way of life. And if, say, for example, you are in the logistics sector, gig economy is very necessary because you got peaks and troughs and you're trying to also manage cost. So it's not necessarily always a bad thing. The key question is, how can you engage some of your gig workers fairly much the same way as how you would engage your full-time workers. Second, the aging workforce. We've got folks who probably grew up with digital and using the computer or using anything with digital is very normal, as compared to someone who grew up very analog, learning to learn new things. It's going to be a little bit tougher. And with that, we do know that Singapore is an aging workforce. There are also going to be a lot more and more aging employees. But yet at the same time, we cannot say that they can't change, because it is going to go more and more digital. People are going to work longer. So it's not like if I'm 60 today, I hope and we and all can start working by 60. But the likelihood is that's not going to happen. Either willingly or unwillingly, you may need to work slightly longer. And with that, the necessity to learn anything digital is very key. Last but not least, in terms of humans at work, right? And in the past, it's just humans to humans. The closest you get is probably a typewriter or computer. But right now, how do I interface with the AI? How do I interface with a bot? How do I use some of these quick tools that I have in front of me in my computer? So that's something that we all need to learn And with that, we're going to talk about skills, right? If you look at that little arc there, in the past it's more, okay, I've got my own domain expertise, I've got my own specialist, that's enough. Right now, it's not quite enough. You've got your domain digital expertise, but you've also got to do a lot more. What do I have from a digital angle? I need to look at data. Do I know how to look at data? Do I know where to look at? Do I understand my customers, internal or external? If you are in the government sector, you're probably thinking about, how can I answer my fellow Singaporeans? If you're in the private sector, it will be more, how do I answer my fellow business partners? How do I even answer my customers, my external customers? So these are all the things that you now need to do a lot more than what you used to do before. Now, on the next one, I think most of you are HR today, and we talk quite a lot around workforce planning. You probably did it a lot last year and a lot more last year, especially if you have, say, workers coming from JB just right across the border, or you've always had a nice steady source of work, workers coming through across the border. Right now, that's going to change. And that is changing. In fact, it's quite hard to probably get some of your workers right now. So what does that really mean for me as HR, and what does that also really mean for me as an organization? We do know that the business has changed. It is continuously changing. What does that then mean, and what's new requirement? That's something that we need to know. It's not just something that the internal strategists in your organization plan for. You need to understand what that is so that you can then also respond quickly rather than more proactively, than be left at the last minute or be the last person to know, for example, and then you always scramble. So that's one. Two, it's around consumer demands, right? It's always changing. We as citizens are also changing our demands. We expect things to happen very, very fast. But do we have the capacity and the capability to also then respond to some of that? I want to spend a bit more time on the numbers that you see in front of you from 1 to 6, just so that you can also think through. And if you have any questions, you can just pop it in the chat, and we'll take a look at that throughout the end of the webinar. So 1, right? How can I be more proactive versus reactive? And I do know that HR is always thinking about that, because the last thing that you want to do is, gosh, I'm trying to plan for something, and then somebody call me, ask me about this, ask me about that. Can't they just look it up themselves? Things are always happening from HR. We always say it's a very thankless job. You do good, nobody thank you, and you do bad, everybody condemns you, right? So I understand how that feels. Second, the alignment, right, of competency management, performance management. How do I do all of that? In the past, it could probably be done by various people. Today, it could still be done by various people. But right now, today, it's very hard to do that in silo, right? So some of the things that we need to think about is how can we align all of that and help the business understand what are we really trying to do. The balance of investment of workforce, a lot of people are talking about work-life balance, and work-life balance in people's minds still today, it's about how can I come at work at 9 and leave work at 5, maybe 6. There is that shift, and I do see companies moving quite well in that. People do understand that work-life balance is about work-life flexibility. It's about how can I do things when I want, in between. But obviously, if you've got workers that are on the line, it's going to be very hard to do that kind of balance. And if you have any questions on that, you can pop it in the chat, and we can then share some strategies towards the end. Employee engagement is no longer about just sending an engagement survey. It's about how can you continuously engage employees, especially like that, right? Remotely. Do I even know if they're paying attention? If they don't turn on their cameras, for example? Is it necessary to turn on cameras? These are all the conversations that you see happening a lot. And the last 2 things is about being more proactive, and how can I also focus on my career? Because that's still a question that everybody asks, pandemic or not. Right now, people, yes, they are grateful that they have a job, but following that, moving on is something that people still will continuously think about. Okay. Now, you'll see yourselves here in some of these little boxes, but I just want to touch base and leave you 3 key things with this, right? 1, strategic workforce planning is not just an HR job, right? And you may or may not be thankful for me to say that. 1 is if you think about the bus analogy, right? You just so happen, or HR just so happen to be the driver of the bus. But you do need input around which route you're going to take, where you're going to go, who you're going to drop off, where are the stops, and so on. And those are the people that you see around you, right? For example, senior management, division heads, line managers, the people that are a lot more interface with your employees, and last but not least, your employees. It's more and more important to make sure that they understand what's really going on. Especially right now, right? People start thinking about job security. Can I save my job, right? With all that's going on around the media, people are naturally a lot more uncertain, and then they get a lot edgy. And then you see all these strange behaviors in the organization. So that's probably why workforce planning is more and more important. If it wasn't already for you, it's just gotten a lot more important. Okay, some of these slides will be with you, so don't worry. And just hang on. I got a few more slides to go. Okay, so again, I think just a bit of a summary. The necessity to understand business strategy is more and more important, because if you don't have this top part that you see here, it's going to be, I won't say impossible, but it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to respond quickly around what are some of the demands that's happening. Let's just say, for example, your business is moving in a certain direction. Do you understand? Is there a technology transformation? What's the new business model you're going to take? And then you as HR, all these things happen, but that doesn't mean that the jobs stay the same, because you can't just keep adding things onto people. Supply, if you know all these on the right side, on the left side, then what do? Do I know who does what job? How can I make sure that employees understand what are we doing, and we're not just loading more work for the sake of? Do people understand what needs to happen? Is there knowledge transfer if I'm going to change jobs? What are my career options, and so on and so forth? Okay, so what I'm going to do in the next probably 15 minutes or so is to spend a bit more time to help you through a case study, which I'll do later, and to help you think around how you can approach this. This sample will be with you, so don't worry about that. I'm just going to walk you through this little bit of a template that we have. And it's also something which I used in my previous organization as HR, but it's just a thought process, okay? So stay with me. Cover 2 points here. Point number 1, demand identification. If you think about how you yourself do demand, sometimes it's a numbers game, right? This year, I have 45 people. Next year, my business is going to go 20%. Maybe I top up with about 15% of headcount. Something like that, right? That's how things will likely be done. I ask you to think of it one step ahead. If you think about one as HR individuals, what you can also have conversations with your team and your business partners is, yes, I understand that we are growing as a business. What do you need, right? If I understand this is the operations that's headed to, I know that these are the things that we have. Do I have the right skills in order for my people to deliver whatever the business is trying to do? These are some of the questions that you can have. With that, you will get slightly more spot on the number of people, right? Demand doesn't always necessarily mean that, I increase headcount over headcount. We just do not have enough people to do everything, right? Even if Singapore has 0% unemployment rate, we still don't have enough people to do the work, right? We can't keep adding people again and again, right? It's more and more expensive, and that's why people are starting to look at technology changes. So with that in mind, if I already know these are all the things that I need, or the capabilities I require, take a look at your people today, right? Can we and do we still need the same headcount to deliver that? Obviously, if you ask that question to your line managers, I'm going to say yes. If you ask me any more people, I will always say yes. So help them, walk them through some of the thinking process so that they can also understand that it's not always a numbers game from a people perspective, but how can you make better use of some of the people that you already have today. Okay, this template will be with you, so don't worry about that. Okay, supply, I know I need all that, right? Where am I going to find these people? If you're lucky, for example, if you're in an organization with a more global reach, sometimes your internal labor supply could be someone from overseas, or you could also do remote working from a regional office and so on and so forth. If you don't have that luxury of an external reach to augment your workforce, be it a gig economy or not, you have to look at your current headcount as the starting point, right? And then you have other things, right? Your natural attrition, unnatural attrition, as well as retirement. With that, it actually forms your internal supply, right? And then you take a look at externally. There's a reason why we broke it down like that. There are many ways that we look at external supply. It's basically a number of people and where do we get, right? Either from school, from another sector, or can I maybe borrow somebody and say that, you know what, I need you for X number of time. How can I then borrow that? So that's your external labor supply that you have. Again, I mean, just to leave you here, that is really just not a numbers game, and that's what we are trying to leave this with you. Sometimes, and we do know that, you know, getting, even if you have the numbers to hire, sometimes it's just not easy to hire because either your brand is, you think your brand is not as good as what it should be. People are always saying, you know what, I don't want to work for this company. I always want to go to Facebook, so on and so forth. Those are the stuff that we always hear. Trust me, even in EY, we hear that as well. But there are certain things that you can on-sell and you can upsell within your organization. And these are the things that is not going to be a one-size-fits-all. Every organization have their own selling point. And with that, I just want to leave you this so that I can go straight into the job redesign in the last 7 minutes or so. Okay, so job redesign, some of you may already know what that is, but just to land everybody on the same page, it just really means, you know, what is the changing task and the way work is performed in my existing job, okay? There are many ways to do job redesign. One is I have a task, I split it into two. This person does that job, this other person does that job. So you split it across two of the same level. Unstacking, I've got this task, can I push it down into another role, right? Or can I maybe move it up into another role, right? Segmenting is, if I have this task, all these tasks today, if I'm going to relook at that, is there a better way to move things around? So if you think about it like a Lego or jigsaw puzzle, that's exactly how you're going to do. If you've done all three, sometimes you will also realize that, actually there are new things that we need to do that is not previously performed, and you will actually do notice a lot of that. If you haven't yet noticed, I ask you to take a deeper look, because that's definitely there with the introduction of technology especially, okay? What does that then mean from a job redesign? Let's just take this job role, a manufacturing role, a technician, very similar to most manufacturing setup. You have, for example, if you look at the first yellow one, around the opportunity, what is necessary that you need to take is, how do I even get here, right? It's probably one of the questions that you get. What you do need to, what you probably first need to do is to line up, right, all the jobs that you're trying to look at, because there is a natural flow. For example, if I'm a process technician today, there's a likelihood of me having someone above me. Sometimes there's someone below me, right? You don't need to understand what all these jobs do so that you can then start moving things around. So for this particular company, what happens is we realize that a set of tasks, activity A, is done by a lot of people, and possibly doing the same thing. It's just that it's being done by different job roles. Can we, maybe, should we align that? So the answer for this one, the answer is yes, right? Because I have 43 people, it doesn't make sense for everybody doing the same thing. And this is not a line operation, right? If I'm a line operation, everybody does the same thing, fine, makes sense. But if you have an engineer, production engineer, manufacturing engineer, and a process technician doing the same thing, is this correct or not? I think it's a question that you need to ask yourself. There is no right answer for that. It depends on what works for your organization. So therein lies opportunity one, to redesign the job. Opportunity two, is there idle time? And the idle time doesn't mean rest time, right? Because that needs to, you need to rest, but is there then anything that can be done? Okay, I'll just finish it up so that we can then move to the next section in the last 6 minutes. So last but not least, job redesign 3, right? Is there repeated and redundant tasks? That in lies the, can I remove the robot out of the human? If the answer is yes, and it doesn't cost you a lot more money than as you would from a headcount perspective, then the answer is this is also another opportunity for you to think about, okay? I'm just going to go straight into, you know, a case study, right? And that's probably more from an HR angle around how you maybe yourselves could also take a look at your job role. And I have to admit that at least in the past 1 year, sometimes what we hear is, yes, the business is changing a lot. HR, can you yourself also change? Can you yourself also add on or remove jobs, right? Because if everybody's going to cut headcount, HR, you also need to cut headcount. So this is a real example that we helped an organization with. This is the HR function that I'm going to walk you through. So some of these things might be quite familiar to you. So company A, this organization already has a very lean HR team. The overall headcount is 200 people, 300 people, and the HR team has 3 HR and 2 payroll, okay? Currently, they are stretched already. I'm sure you would all know that, you can understand that. Second, because some of the work is fairly manual, there's definitely a high risk of error. And also because you're stretched across multiple things, the focus is a lot lesser. Staff has little time to do anything more value adding as they would like due to the workload. As you can imagine, HR ops gets very complex, gets very long, and it's very, very time consuming. One employee complaint or one employee's question can also take you longer than you can anticipate, depending on the complexity of the question. So with this, for this HR team, unfortunately, what they cannot do is to add headcount, right? So one way is they have to probably rely on how can they automate certain things in the least expensive way, such that they can also then remove the robot from the human. So what they did, right, pretty much lined up around, okay, you know what, this is the end-to-end things I need to do as HR. Fortunately have a shared service center where there's a self-service, I can answer queries. B, I have a system already, I have a HR management system. C, I do onboarding and outsourcing, and that's something that I'm going to focus on today because that sometimes takes a lot of HR work, a lot of time. I've got L&D, I've got performance management, rewards, benefits, payroll, onboarding. If you think about it, there's a whole end-to-end suite of what HR already does. So this organization has pretty much all the things that they need to manage, okay? Now, what they did notice after going through this lineup was that actually onboarding process was a quick win that they can have, and it takes up a lot of time. Why? If you remember the structure of this organization, it is always hiring, it is in manufacturing, it is still growing. Onboarding people is very important. So that's something which they still spend a lot of time on. For your organization, it may not be onboarding, okay? It can be maybe learning administration. It could probably be rewards. It could probably be even payroll, right? So take a look at within your own organization, what needs to probably move. But for this organization, onboarding was a quick win for them, a little bit inexpensive for them to roll out, and it takes away a lot of time. Save a lot of time. So some of you might be very familiar with this process. It's a bit small, but let me walk you through a little bit. A candidate, hopefully your candidate experience is a little bit better than this. If I'm a candidate, I'm a new joiner, I receive an email from HR, fill up all these forms, return back. Then HR will return to you and say, thank you, please verify this information. And then because it's so manual, there's quite a lot of missing information. Candidate will correct the information if they read it properly, and they send it back to you, okay? So that's all that they heard from you. If you look at that, the bottom, the yellow portion, there's a lot of things that HR needs to do. I need to, one, open my email, draft an email to the employee, need to check for incoming emails, because it's not just one employee, right? There are many employees. Suddenly receives another email to complete this form, to complete that form. I then need to go to my HR system, enter in something, hopefully I enter in correctly. Start date, hopefully you enter in correctly as well, and things don't miraculously change. Instead of start next week, I start this week. So all these factors happen, especially when it's not that fully automated yet, okay? Now, what this organization did was they actually had an RPA, because they already have a system. So introducing RPA in one of the forms actually does help quite a fair bit. What they did was they included that for onboarding, and if you take a look at it, for one employee, it went from 2 hours to 3 minutes. And you might be thinking, are you sure? No, is this true, right? Because what this RPA process helps you with is automated email sending, and what you need to only then do is to enter in the information once. It will then automate and it will send the emails out. So I don't know if you have received it, but for example, myself, when I rejoined EY, I didn't need that much of a human interface with my HR team because the system actually automatically emails me so that I know what to do, and I can email them back, or I can go into SuccessFactors or Workday or whatever that you use to enter in some of my questions. So that's how processes can get streamlined very quickly. Okay, so I think we're top on time. I'm just going to close off some of these things and we can then move on to the Q&A because I know I sped through some slides. So if you have any questions, we can always go back and help answer some of that. Okay, now I'm just going to probably cover a little bit on some of the job redesign initiatives. So this is some of the value add that they have. I'm just going to put this slide here to let you take a read. But basically, it's a lot of time savings and I can now use my extra hour and a half to do something else. Okay, so with that, I'm just going to leave you some resources. And because you're going to get some of these slides, I think you'll definitely take value from that. We are item number one, EY is on this, so and it's not fully funded, it's partially funded. So if you as an organization, you're very keen to sign up or to understand how to do a lot more workforce, there's a QR code here, feel free to scan. And then you can also then take a look at some of the self-help toolkits that we developed together with SBF. And I think you're free to use some of it, you just need to sign up. If you are keen to go onto this program, take a look at that. The price is also on the website and you can register your interest. Number two is a free report that we have for financial services. We have one for logistics as well. If you're keen to know, where to find us, you can drop us a quick email, you can drop the SSG team a quick email and we can help you with. Last but not least, the skills framework. It's a lot of work that the government has done. So do take a look at the various sectors that you have. I believe some of it will be very useful for you. Okay. I'm just going to leave the Q&A right now, just so that we can go right into answering some of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Callista and Samir. So to kickstart the whole Q&A question, I actually have one question for both of them. Maybe you can. So first question is, given how quickly the economy and the consumer behavior is changing now, how do companies justify the cost of training their employees?
Great. So thank you for the participant that asked the question, and thanks, Matthew, for repeating it. The fact of the matter is consumer behavior is changing. Businesses are responding to the changed consumer behavior through either innovating, changing their operating model, so on and so forth. Now, the way they execute that is through the workforce. Now, from a business, they are always trying to answer the three questions, which is where, Callista talked a lot about SWP, is buy, build, or borrow. That means, do they need to hire new people to do this work? Or do they build their own people to do this work? Or is it not a core activity and therefore they may need to borrow? The biggest value add is when they can learn and upskill their people to take part in this digital transformation. There's one thing we've always stated. For organizations, they either digitize or they die. That means if they don't digitize, they will likely not be relevant. But the critical question to be answered is not the digitize or die. But the critical question is to answer is, can they take their workforce and upskill them through this journey so that they can partake with this new level of productivity, the new success of the organization? So therefore, the old adage that, when a CFO asked a CEO and he said, why do we train our people? Because they all leave. And the CEO's question is, if we don't train them and they all stay, what will happen? So learning will continually be important for all organizations. And on this call, I just suggest go back to your finance heads and your CEOs and say you need to increase your learning budget. Tell them that I said so. Just joking.
Thanks, Samuel. Yeah. Okay, so another question for you will also be, traditionally, the travel industry is highly dependent on labor input. Do you foresee a change in the operating model?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, even pre-pandemic, we saw this change happening where, a lot more of digital transformation was happening. I'll give you a very simple example. Even pre-pandemic, when you went to our own airport, you could see that slowly the change happened where you need to check in yourself, you need to go through the processes yourself, right? If you go back many, many years back and you even go to hospitality, the change happened. For example, I'd say 20, 25 years back, every hotel had a doorman. Today, only the iconic hotel or the Raffles Hotel has a doorman. Everything else is more or less automated. So we see this digital transformation, a less dependency on labor continuously going to happen, be it in the frontline functions itself in terms of check-in, that experience using technology. The great thing is consumers now, I think the pandemic has accelerated our use of technology. So we aren't so worried on using technology to do some of our things. Even some of the, I'd say, back-end functions like housekeeping, so on and so forth, a lot more use of robots, a lot more use of seamless solutions that reduce the labor input that is required. Now, this doesn't mean that those people doing those jobs will be out of jobs necessarily. What it means is the people doing those jobs, they can learn new tasks, they can transform themselves, and therefore pick on a new role. I give you a good example of a recent work that Callista did on the logistics sector, where we saw the forklift operator's job likely to go away. Just digress and give you another example. But that doesn't mean the people who are forklift operators may not have a job. As long as they learn upskill and let's say become a iPhone 4.0 maintenance specialist, they will be able to call those solution areas, they will still be able to perform some of those tasks quite well.
Great, thank you. Another question definitely is about how to, from EY perspective, how do you see a greater access of the talent or and skills beyond the geographical boundary? Internet of Things is also allowing enterprise, big or small, to tap on global talents. Will these be prevalent?
Yeah, so maybe I start and then ask Callista to add in because I don't want to hog the Q&A session. Callista.
Sure.
So one of the primary forces in our megatrends report is globalization. And I think with the Internet of Everything, we are so close to our customers who could be maybe in Paya Lebar, but equally similarly close to someone, a customer that is in Shanghai or in Beijing or in Tokyo or in Stockholm, right? In the same way, from a talent pool perspective, large organizations will start picking areas of expertise for talent pools to play roles. And therefore, we see likely that organizations restructure their workforces in line with this global world. Callista?
Yeah, I'll give you a bit more practical example, right? Now, if you're HR, can this and will this be more prevalent? The answer is yes. How do you respond to this? Is very interesting. Do you have a policy? Are you willing to change your policy to allow for cross-border work? Is your tax system ready to accept ways that you can offset your tax for global borders, right? So these are all the things that you do need to think about. Now, in my previous organization, we had to relook at the policy because we already know that this is going to happen. What you cannot do is, if say, for example, today I'm going to work in China, can I or can I not? Are you flexible? And is your policy flexible to allow this? Go back to your policy rather than answering that question off the cuff, right? Because you cannot make too many exceptions as HR. Because exceptions are hard to track, right? And as HR, you hate to track exceptions because how come this individual can work from China, but I cannot work from Malaysia, for example? How come this one can work from X, I cannot work from Y? So I would go back and say that, yes, there's a trend. And if you do see that trend in your organization, let's not forget about your own organization's policy and structure. If that's going to happen, you must look at your policy. Not just Singapore policy, if you're going to work out China, does China allow that as well? So again, that regional focus, you do need to make that happen more and more, because especially right now, if you cannot move someone from a country A to country B, this could be your best bet, especially if you're a multinational company. If you have a data scientist, a lot of them coming out from China, can you bring them in today? If you have a tech pass, that tech pass only allows you to bring X number, right? Can I allow my chief data scientist, for example, to be residing elsewhere, but work for Singapore or work for the region? I would ask you to take a look at your policy, and then how much are you willing to bend it and make it a new policy? Yeah, Samir?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good practical example that really to look at policy to make sure that it is applied across all your workforce, whether it be Singapore or even the regional. Okay, another question will be also for from Joanna. So with this shortening of business planning and changing team structure, adopting of agile framework, etc., how do this impact individual performance appraisal? What is EY take on this and recommendation? Callista, do you want to answer this?
Yeah, I will be very practical and I can give you a live example of what happened in my previous firm. So anything agile means it's hard to track. Hence, again, take a look at the individual's job, yeah, and this is a change process that you might need to go through. It's not going to happen overnight, that much I can guarantee you. You do have more forward-looking managers who will allow that kind of agile working. Let's work based on outcomes, not based on hours. I cannot see you means I'm not working. I see you means you're working. That kind of thing, right? That's part one. And how can I move away from SOP, if I think about agile frameworks, right? SOP to around Scrum. Scrum and SOP are conflicting views, yeah? One can apply in one area, one can apply in a particular process. You can have a Scrum within an SOP. So what I would advise you to do basically, right, is don't keep changing your team structure for the sake of. If it needs to change because your business is changing, so be it. But if you're changing because you're trying to respond to a current area, it could be a short one, but you also then need to think about it long term. Sales, let's just take the sales organization as an example, right? Do you want to change from north, south, east, west to east and west only? Does that make sense? Do you have enough people to cover the entire coverage? So these are one or two ways to think about. I answer your second part around performance appraisal. I would suggest to put a short time frame. So for example, even agile, right? It happens within 3 months. It also happens within 6 months. Take a look at your performance appraisal and try to make sure that, say for example, right, if I need to hit certain outcomes, that the outcome doesn't change, right? The task could change. So these are some of the parameters that you can probably play around with performance appraisal without moving the needle too much. Because when you move the needle too much, you're right. There's no way for it to track. There's no way to track from A to Z. So if, say for example, customer outcome is important, keep it there. The weightage still the same. But how I go about doing things, that's fine. I think that part you can change because it doesn't really impact the performance appraisal too much because your outcome measures are still the same. Samir, you want to add on?
Yeah, just a couple of points from me. I always like to learn from technology firms because they've kind of implemented this, and in many ways, most of our organizations today have become technology firms. I mean, you talk about financial sector itself, it's primarily now technology driven. I mean, our largest bank here has a slogan called Live More Bank Less, which is basically meaning that it's going to be seamless in our operation. So if you take the technology firms, and what makes them successful is they have flatter structures, they're collaborative, they're connected, they're team-based, right? So if we apply those same principles to performance management, right? And what that basically means we need is shorter cycles, more regular feedback. And I think in today's day of feedback, we get that feedback a lot easier than maybe in the past, where, you know, if you go 20 years back, it'd be paper driven, and now you can get feedback in a very regular interval. So more feedback oriented, more performance, and the role of performance management also changes. In the past, it was to measure performance. Now it is about improving performance on a continuous basis. So if we keep those principles in mind, we can drive a better performance management architecture in the organization. Obviously, a lot what Callista and I said is a lot easier said than done. Therefore, the value in it is in executing. I go back to the point of having the right performance metrics in place, because what gets measured gets done. Very often, we talk about change in organization, change in structures, but we live on the same KPIs that we've driven in the past. So if you are living off the same KPIs, you will get the same results that you've been trying to do in the past as well.
All right, thank you, Samir and Callista. And mindful of time, I will take the one last question. That is posted by Sun Ju. Talk about strategic workforce planning sound daunting. How can smaller enterprise take practical action to plan for this business workforce needs?
Callista, over to you.
Yeah.
It's a tough question, so I give it to Callista.
No problem. Now, is it daunting? It sounds daunting. Is it new to you? The answer is no, right? I believe a lot of you have done it. Consciously or unconsciously, you definitely have done it. It probably doesn't sound like it. Especially for smaller organizations, because you don't have the luxury of other help, either from your regional office or probably for whatever reasons that you have, that is going to be more and more important for you to think about, because the first thing you need to answer is how can you use your current resources to deliver what you need. Does it make sense to do digital, right? Is it too expensive? Be like, crazy, I only have like 10 people. You sure you want me to go RPA or not? The right question is, when you go RPA, can you still live with 10 people, right? I hope the answer is yes. And the second is with 10, can you afford 11, 12, 13? I think those, it's not a straight answer because you do need to take inside your organization to take a look and see what makes more sense. Can you afford to go non-digital and for how long, right? I think that's the critical question that you do need to answer. So that's more on the digital angle. If you already have all of that, the answer is to continuously have the right skills to last probably for the next few years. And I think again, back to, is workforce strategy, workforce planning important? You could go as simple as, I have 10 people today. These are all the skills I have. What do I need? I need these 10 people, can I still deliver? If the answer is yes, let's move them around. Maybe could be as simple as that. Or I have 10 people, they all cannot do these. I'm in trouble. Hopefully you can work things around. But if you can, right, then take a look at that. It's necessary for you to chart out, right? It's going to be very difficult for you to keep thinking about it rather than charting it out. If you chart it out, you can very easily find the right spaces to improve what you do need to improve. Samir?
I think we've covered most of it. I think the key message is, invest in learning, upskill, reskill, and be a lifelong learner in every person, for all your employees and yourself as an individual as well. So I think we've pretty much run out of time, but we've hopefully been able to address some of the burning questions that the participants had.
Yeah. I saw a taxation one. I asked, I'm not a tax advisor. I don't have a straight answer for you. If you could just leave your details, and if you are you still really want to know, I can get one of our tax experts to get back to you. Again, from my personal experience, it's not a very straight answer. I hope you have a internal tax person to help you with that. If you do, that internal tax person can answer that. Otherwise, if you need an EY advice, I'll get a tax advisor to answer that for you. I'm unfortunately not one, so I don't want to give the wrong advice.
Right. Okay. Thanks for all the questions, and thanks for Callista and Samir to really answer this the question posed. So just want to sum it up that we really come to the end of this webinar session, and we give you thanks for all the tips that you've given us on charting out the new frontier, or what are the things that we have to do. Everybody have to upskill, reskill to help to be ready for the future. And really thanks Samir and Callista once again for sharing this your insights with us and answer some of our questions. And to all webinar attendees, I hope that you have good takeaways from this session. We also would like to encourage you to take this opportunity to share with us what do you think about the webinar. And we will be pushing out a webinar every month itself at SSG. So look out for our emails coming to you on this. And if you have, and we would like you to take this survey for 2 minutes of your time, and your feedback is very important to us, and you'll be confidential and help us to improve our webinar. And if you are interested to find out the initiative that SkillsFuture has, please kindly refer to the links here, enterprise and individuals. And just to reiterate, today's webinar session will be hosted in my SkillsFuture portal, SSG LinkedIn, and YouTube page. And the slides from EY will be emailed to you over the next few days. And my name is Matthew, together with Jia Tao, and I want to thank you, Samir, Callista, and the EY team for your support. And we'll see you next month. Thank you.